For decades, corporations have made cash out of crime. But in 2016, that could all be about to change in the U.S.
Corrections Corporation of America and GO Group are the two largest private prison companies, with combined revenues of $2.9 billion last year.
Welcome to WatchMojo News, the weekly series where we break down news stories that might be on your radar. In this installment, we're counting down 10 crucial facts you should know about the end of private prisons in the United States.
The prison inmate population expanded so rapidly the government couldn't keep up with it by itself. But now it says that has changed. The inmate population is shrinking.
Number 10. What is a private prison? Otherwise known as a for-profit prison, a private prison is run by a non-government third party. Fundamentally, its purpose, to house prisoners securely, is the same as a federal prison. But its income comes from governmental contracts, with rates usually based on the amount of prisoners incarcerated at a particular facility, or the space available regardless of whether every cell is occupied. Private prisons are a controversial topic in the U.S. and around the world, as protesters believe that corporate money shouldn't be made from the criminal justice system. Number 9. How prevalent are private prisons in the United States? As of August 2016, there were 13 private prisons in operation in the U.S., located across 8 states, including 5 in Texas alone. Inmate populations range from between 1,000 to 3,200 per facility, with just over 22,000 people held in private prisons, a little over 10% of the total number of prisoners overall in the U.S., which is just short of 200,000. Private prison populations reached a high point in 2014, when for-profit sites held around 40,000 inmates. According to reports, 25% of the world's prisoners were incarcerated in the U.S. in 2015, despite the country housing just 5% of the global population. This has led some analysts to tie the spike in private prison use with an imbalance in the prisoner-to-population ratio. Number 8. How prevalent are private prisons around the world? The United Kingdom was the first European country to introduce privately run prisons in modern times, when Wald's Prison opened in 1992. As of 2016, there are 16 private prisons across England, Scotland, and Wales, all operated by either Serco, Sodexo, or G4S. Canada has only ever had 2 private prisons, both of which are now under government control. And there are 7 private sites in Australia, with the first opening in the 1990s. There was an attempt to introduce private prisons in Israel in the mid-2000s, but the first facilities were deemed unconstitutional in 2009. A panel found that privately run complexes were in danger of depriving prisoners of their basic human rights. Number 7. What are criticisms of the private prison system?
The notion that a corporation making a profit off this practice is more important to us than public safety or the human rights of prisoners is outrageous.
Opponents of for-profit prisons argue that money is the main driver for private owners, not prison management. The U.S. has seen a sharp rise in the amount of people incarcerated since the turn of the century, a trend that many attribute to so-called prison profiteers driven by greed. There are also concerns about the welfare of inmates and staff at private prisons, with accusations ranging from neglect to abuse. According to a 2016 report issued by the Inspector General of the Justice Department, there are more safety and security issues at private prisons than at federal jails. Problems include, quote, extensive property damage, bodily injury, and the report also listed details of a 2012 incident at Adams County Correctional Center in Mississippi, a riot in which one correctional officer was killed. Number 6. Who runs private prisons? The majority of America's private prisons are run by 2 major corporations, Corrections Corporation of America and the GO Group. The CCA is the country's largest private prison group, with over 110 million shares and a market cap of over $4 billion as of July 2015. GEO weighs in with around 75 million shares, with value of its shares approximately worth $2.75 billion. CCA is seen as the first of the modern prison privatization firms, after it gained a contract for a Tennessee facility in 1984. Ever since then, it's seen finances boom, with profits increasing by more than 500% in the last 20 years. Today, it has over 65 correctional and detention facilities under its management. According to reports, CCA and GEO show combined annual revenue of $3.3 billion. Number 5. What has the Department of Justice done to get rid of private prisons in the U.S.? On August 18, 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice made the first significant steps towards shutting down private prisons and giving control of the system back to the government. The reasons for potential closure were listed as part of a 2-page memo from the DOJ Deputy Attorney General. The report explained how the prison population had risen by almost 800% between 1980 and 2013, and that the Federal Bureau of Prisons had once needed privatized help to deal with the numbers. However, the prison population has since declined, and though, quote, private prisons served an important role during a difficult period, they are now surplus to requirements. The memo also drew on the Inspector General's report, stating that private prisons do not offer, quote, the same level of correctional services, while it also notes that they do not substantially cut costs, nor are they as safe or secure as government facilities. Number 4. What was the immediate aftermath of the Department of Justice's memo? As the DOJ memo revealed plans to reduce and, quote, ultimately end private prisons, the industry immediately suffered dramatic falls on the stock market. GEO Group stock fell 39% to $19.51, while CCA plummeted 35% to $17.57. Both groups have since responded to events in an effort to calm the market. GEO reminded shareholders that significant change wasn't imminent, as some contracts would not expire for another 5 years. CCA suggested that the corporation was strong enough to withstand the plans put forward by the DOJ, as the private prisons they affected only accounted for 7% of the overall business. CCA also took issue with the Inspector General's report, labeling it as flawed. Number 3. What kind of resistance could this effort face? While the DOJ's plans are sure to be met unfavorably by those involved with the privatization of prisons, the decision to phase them out could yet cause issues for the Federal Bureau. For-profit prisons were first introduced partly as a cost-cutting measure and partly as a method to prevent overcrowding, with the aim to reduce the pressure on the government generated by rising numbers of prisoners. Were a similar situation and rise to occur again, the U.S. might once more require a privatized resource. There's also the question of cost, and whether the eventual closure of America's 13 private prisons could impact governmental budgets. The DOJ has conceded that the long-term outcomes are difficult to predict, but also that it doesn't anticipate having to invest too heavily to absorb the absence of privatized sites. Number 2. What effects will this have on the justice system in the United States? The director of the American Civil Liberties Union's National Prison Project, David Fauti, has called the DOJ memo a, quote, groundbreaking decision. He also explained how the ACLU applauds the move and asked other agencies to follow suit soon. The taking of power from private organizations would reportedly allow for greater uniformity in the prison system and more transparency. The move could also help lower prison numbers, a longtime goal of the Obama administration.
We should not tolerate conditions in prison that have no place in any civilized country.
And it could feature heavily in Hillary Clinton's campaign for presidency, as she promises large-scale criminal justice reform. Number 1. Is this the end of private prisons in the United States? If the DOJ's plans are realized and no private contracts are renewed, then the last for-profit prisons will have disappeared by 2021. However, some analysts are skeptical that the change is even feasible. According to Heights Securities industry expert Daniel Hansen, the plans are, quote, aspirational, but not necessarily, quote, attainable. The financial impact could yet prove too much of a burden. And even if the government is able to comfortably lose the 13 private facilities currently contracted, privatized services will still feature heavily in the U.S. justice system. Immigrant-only centers are set to remain privately run, for example. For supporters of reform, it's a step in the right direction, but only the first of many towards a fairer, more effective prison system. Did these facts get you thinking?
Every dollar I have to put into a prison takes away from my infrastructure on my roads, takes away from my infrastructure of building new buildings on college campuses.
To vote for which news story is covered next, head over to WatchMojo.com/suggest. And be sure to hit that subscribe button for more newsworthy top 10s published every week.
Private prisons filled their role for a time, but now that role is being phased out. And within the next, say, 3 to 5 years, the government hopes not to be relying on them anymore at all.